We come then to the COVID-19 briefing. Just to give you an outline of what we want to cover, I'd like to just make some introductory comments myself on that, because there are discussions that are ongoing at the moment that I need to advise you about. I will be asking our Chief Executive, Jim Stabak, to talk about the forthcoming consultation process with the staff of Auckland Council around requirements for vaccination. And there will be a report from Phil Wilson and Mace Ward, and a slide presentation on some of the things that Council has been doing. In terms of just some general introductory comments from myself, I'm not sure what the experience of other councillors has been, but my experience is that the tolerance and patience around the community with the prolonged nature of our lockdown are starting to wear a bit thin. And regrettably, I've got to say that feeling of and the commitment to he waka eka noa, that we're all in this together, is starting to be lost. And what I'm getting back from the community is that the large percentage of the people who have been vaccinated are starting to show impatience with those that have decided not to be vaccinated or haven't got around to getting vaccinated yet. And, you know, there are some examples of understandable outrage. I think the repeated efforts by the Destiny Church to be in breach of the rules that everybody else has to live under, the so-called hikoi of truth, and the idea that we want people from around the country marching through or driving through Auckland to end up at Waitangi, not welcomed at Waitangi, by the way, by local iwi, and the reports to which there is some accuracy about the role of really gangs and other marginalised groups in spreading of COVID, most particularly in the Waikato. There is a real sense of anger toward those groups, and a feeling that while everybody else is following the rules and everybody else is making the sacrifice, people that are, particularly those that are preaching disinformation, are letting the side down, and I understand that. What I'm worried about is that there is a risk of a spillover of that anger to sections of the community, and in particular the Maori community, where the vaccination rates are lower. And I think at all costs we need to avoid that spillover of anger, that we need to continue the huge efforts that are being made to work with, as we have with our Pacifica community and now with the Maori community, to lift those levels of vaccination. And that needs to be a positive and constructive, not a blaming exercise, if we are to achieve the objectives that all of us want. I think that there is some good news, however, that we need to share around. I think that having that clear goal of 90% double vaccination to get us to the first of the traffic lights, the red level, has been a big step forward. We now know what we're seeking to achieve. And, you know, I've been asking questions, and I want to share the answers with you, of particularly our health professionals, about how realistic is this, and when is this likely to happen. And, you know, you've seen, I think, the latest figures, which show that the first jabs in Auckland DHB are 93%, and Waitemata now 91%, and in counties Manukau 88%. And the figures for each of those regions on second vaccinations are 82, 77 and 74. We need, for example, 9,000 extra vaccinations to get counties Manukau across the line for the 90% first vaccination target. I had a discussion yesterday with Matt Hannant, that you'll be familiar with, who leads the vaccination campaign in Auckland. And he said that a 90% double vaccination rate by early December, and I want to quote him, is totally achievable, and that the health authorities are absolutely committed to getting us there. There is a range of activities planned, some of them not large events like the Vaxathon, but events at Eden Park and at Mount Smart. There is much more emphasis about going out into the community, and some of you have been part of that and have participated in it, using the buses, using the camper vans, using the information that health authorities have to target those areas where vaccinations have been low. Over Labour weekend, it was a pretty dismal turnout, but there has been some comeback since then. On Tuesday, we had 440 vaccinations in Auckland and over 42,000 vaccinations across the country, and a high percentage of those were Maori. So there's some good news there. On the new cases, my expectation was this week we'd be in triple figures consistently, and we haven't been. We've had a couple of days down around 70 for Auckland, and it's too early to say that's great, we've dodged a bullet there. I'm not certain that we have yet, and those figures could spring up again. But I have talked to people who are expert in this area, and they say this may well be a reflection of the fact that we are already, by international standards, very highly vaxxed, that we haven't got up to the level that you've seen. Certainly we haven't got anywhere near the level you've seen in Melbourne and Sydney. So look, too early to say. The figures could come up again today. I haven't seen the latest figures yet. There is still a threat. There is still a threat to our hospital system, particularly ICU, being overwhelmed. But so far, so good that we have managed to contain that at lower levels, but are unlikely to stamp it out. The other thing I just wanted to touch on was the business package. We talked about that a bit on Tuesday. Very well received by the business leadership, and I think some reward for the efforts that we and others have been making to press on government what the impact is on our business community and on jobs of this prolonged period of lockdown. And, you know, I don't make light of the real pressure that people are under, both employees and businesses, because of the lockdown. I thought it was a pretty good package, and it got widespread support. As I mentioned to you the other day, I am about to, probably today or tomorrow, to put a further package to Grant Robertson. I don't expect that I'll get everything that I want out of it, but the invitation is there to work with them on it. And that package will involve temporary changes to the Sale of Liquor Act, so that we can free up some of that al fresco dining that we aren't able to do ourselves without, you know, strong cooperation from health, from police, and maybe change in the legislation. Exploring the idea of a voucher system, not necessarily one that's just about restaurant meals. I think that's a pretty middle class approach to take, but how we can recognise that people have been doing it hard in Auckland, and giving them a little bit of flexibility and expenditure that would then be reflected across the business community in greater spending. And be interesting to see what the reaction of the government will be, but they haven't ruled that out. So I hope that we can maybe find some way of doing that. And then the third aspect of the package would be in line with what we heard yesterday from Auckland Unlimited about how we can promote Auckland as a city as we come out of level 3. And, you know, great news that you will have seen in this morning's paper about, you know, Auckland being the best city in the world to visit for 2022 from Lonely Planet. Now, fantastic publicity that money can't buy, but you know, utter frustration if we weren't in a position to open our borders to take advantage of that. With a very high vaccination level, we may be able to. The final thing I just want to say is that there will be an announcement at 1 o'clock today on changes in an MIQ system. I'm not going to breach the government's embargo on that, but it will be, as has been foreshadowed, I think, publicly, an easing of the time that people have to spend in formal isolation in hotels and with sometimes spent at home, but it's a relatively cautious approach that does put safety high on the agenda, but starts to move us, I think, in a direction where the requirement of that 14 days, locked in a hotel room, can be safely eased. But at 1 o'clock we'll get some further information about that and the details of it. So with that, thank you very much for indulging me in those initial comments. Thank you, Daniel Newman, for your comments that you've made, and I agree with that. And thank you for your big efforts out. I know that you're putting in out there, and others on this call. It is making a difference, and it is in the spirit of us continuing to work together to make sure that we can collectively address something that will otherwise have a devastating effect on people and their suffering and their loss of life. So at this point, can I pass across Phil? Maybe you'd like to introduce it, and then at some point we'll get Jim to come in and talk about the staff aspect and vaccination policy towards staff, and of course for us as elected members.
Thank you, Your Worship. Atamare, good morning, members. Yes, I'll just make a few introductory comments. I won't duplicate too much of what you've covered off, Your Worship, or indeed matters that we're probably directing more towards the Tuesday morning briefings, such as operational matters. So the focus today is significantly on vaccination policy, and I'll hand to Jim and Patricia in a moment, and Mace will fill out some details that I think you'll find interesting in terms of the nature of what Council as an organisation is doing on the ground, particularly in the welfare and vaccination support area. But as the Mayor said, I mean, the big picture, not to lose sight of that, and I'm sure you're not, we're very focused on the 90% vaccination targets, and working closely with other agencies on that. And within that, of course, there's a particular focus on the county's Manukau DHB area. And things are progressing in that regard. Look, the big picture is we've got involvement in multiple work streams, the way that I would put it, liaising with the business community, and the Mayor's mentioned the business support package. We've got good liaison with business leaders, and there's a body of advocacy that's borne some fruit out of that area, where we've been closely working with other agencies in terms of border management issues, which is to say that the movement of freight, the movement of people across the borders in a managed way, we've been with other agencies, notably the police, in practical terms on the ground, very involved in providing for venues, facilities, spaces that are practically useful in terms of testing, vaccination and welfare provision. Mace will give you a sense of that, but just to put a number in your head, we're now in excess of 60 council venues and bits of our property that are being utilised for that purpose. And you can imagine, therefore, the extent of liaison that sits in behind that, a really impressive effort by colleagues in the organisation to turn around that decision-making and support health in particular and MSD in that regard. In the welfare space, you'll hear from Mace the scale of that. Again, just to plant some numbers in your mind, so a few weeks ago, the assessment from the Ministry of Social Development was that demand for food support in particular was running at about 10 times the norm as a consequence of COVID isolation. That's probably dropped, they estimate, to around 7 times the norm. So still tremendous demand in the community and a need for support, but the systems are broadly coping in that regard. We've been assisting, as you're aware, with that, and the total number of food parcels generated by council into the community is in the region of 3,000 now. Our focus is changing slightly now, and we're now sort of prioritising and targeting support for people in isolation in liaison with the Northern Region Health Control Centre. So, Your Worship, we could spend a lot of time on this, and I don't intend to. Mace will cover a little bit more detail, but it's probably in your interests worth passing to Jim now to lead out a discussion in the area of vaccination for the organisation.
Thanks, Phil. Jim.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. Thanks, Phil, and good morning, councillors. Look, let me just give you an update on our approach to staff vaccinations. I know that'll be top of mind for many of you, and of course it has been very front and centre in the conversations that ELT have been having over the last 9 or 10 weeks. We of course know that vaccinations provide the best means of protecting our people, and one of the things I would encourage councillors to recognise is that for ELT we have taken a very strong approach around ensuring that we support our obligation or make good on our obligation under the Health and Safety at Work Act to provide a safe working environment for our people. That kind of sits at the top of the hierarchy of our thinking in that respect. It is, of course, though, a complex issue for us for a number of reasons. The thinking in this space is evolving reasonably quickly. Government perspectives on it or positions on it have evolved as well. The nature of our workforce is such that it does make it quite difficult for us to divide our workforce or segment our workforce into component parts that the risk around which can be assessed separately. The workforce is quite organic in nature and interrelated in terms of the way it operates. A few examples of that might be, early childhood education centres are often co-located with active leisure centres or pools. There is a mandate in place for ECE. There wasn't until the other day a mandate in place for active leisure centres. Of course, we would have to think about how that would work. We have consenting officers who work in a number of our buildings who leave our offices every day to visit customer sites, building locations, site inspections, restaurants, bars, all those sorts of things, and then come back to the office to do paperwork or administration. And so the interdependent nature of our workforce, or the organic nature of it, is both complex but also leads us down the path of recognising that our approach is to think about our workforce in a holistic sense rather than a segmented sense. As I said, some parts of the organisation are already covered by mandates or orders, health orders. Early childhood education is one that was covered by the education order. Now, of course, gyms and active rec centres are included as a consequence of the government's announcements earlier in the week. We think that represents, in the aggregate, somewhere between 10 and 13 or so % of our total workforce. We are still required, of course, to undertake a risk assessment in relation to the entire workforce. And so one of the things we've been doing over the last couple of weeks is a comprehensive risk assessment that complies with all of the relevant standards for risk assessments. That will inform our thinking as we move forward. The executive team is due in the next couple of days to make a decision in relation to consultation with our workforce. Of course, consultation is also a legal requirement before we put a policy in place. And so that consultation needs to be supported by the risk assessment. It needs to give adequate time for our people across the entire workforce to consider the proposition or the proposal that we put in front of them. We're allowing 2 weeks for them to consider that, a further week for us to consider the feedback from that consultation, and then of course we need to land on a decision with regard to our policy. You could imagine that will be around early December. A couple of other comments I would make. The government's thinking, and in fact the various industries and the way they respond will guide some of that. That thinking will continue to evolve over the next few weeks and months potentially. Our consultation approach or our policy approach needs to be able to respond to changes as they might happen, and so that will be a factor in our consultation. We don't want to have to reconsult. Our preference is to consult once to set the foundation for our organisation going forward. We will separately have to give consideration to what that means for customers. That's not part of our consultation obligation to staff, but it clearly is a piece of work that we'll have to follow quite quickly. And we will separately, of course, have to give consideration to any implications as it relates to elected members and your ability to undertake your duties without compromise to the democratic obligations that we have to the community. And so that's our approach. As I say, some part of our workforce already covered. The rest of our workforce will be part of a holistic risk assessment that will inform our policy, our draft policy that will go out for consultation. We expect during the course of next week, subject to ELT finalising its decision on that in the next couple of days. I'd probably pause at that point and just see if there are any questions that I can answer or that Patricia could answer. I see Patricia's also on the call.
Yeah, what I might do, Jim, is just pause before we go to questions. Maybe we'll do the slide presentation and ask questions as a whole, but I expect the first questions might come back to you on this. So I've got a note of a couple of people that have got questions, but if I could just get maybe Mace to do his presentation, then we'll come back and do questions on any of the areas that we've covered this morning. So Mace, if you could go next, please.
Certainly, Your Worship. We'll just wait for the presentation to come up.
Yep, it's there.
There we go. Kia ora tātou, Your Worship and elected members. Really good to be with you today and have the opportunity to just run you through some of the activities and the engagement of Auckland Council in this response to the COVID-19 Delta variant. If I can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So there have been a number of objectives, but largely centred around minimising the spread of COVID-19 by supporting our community and also supporting our response partners, largely central government partners, but also the DHBs, of course, Auckland Regional Public Health Service, and significantly our community partners, marae, non-government agencies, but those core community partners that are so important in a response and connecting with our communities, and we've seen how that's been really critical in terms of vaccination. And importantly, disseminating that public information through our communications program. I'll go to the next slide, please. In terms of our welfare response, we've had a triage centre set up in partnership with MSD and the Northern Regional Health Coordination Centre. And that's really been about making sure people get to the right place. So it is about ensuring that the services those people need, they get those more quickly and directly than they may do. So that's been a significant piece of work, and it's been a very successful piece of work, and I acknowledge the welfare response team led by Greg Morgan as the Group Welfare Manager. We'll go to the next slide, please. So just in terms of welfare delivery, a relatively modest amount of calls, but the difference, I guess, in 2021, as we've talked about before, in the COVID response to 2020, is that a lot of the central government agencies and non-government agencies and community organisations have been more able to activate this time and had a planned resurgence response. But still, significant amount of calls that our people have been able to redirect and directly support, as you'll see in the bottom bullet point, 220 households with essential food support. So those are people whom couldn't get to a supermarket or a place or a food bank or other place to receive food. Perhaps they were isolating, perhaps they had other medical issues. And that response has been supported by the National Emergency Management Agency through funding and delivered through our external partners. Next slide, please. In terms of other food support, MSD inform us that we've had, in terms of in September, 10 times the demand from our community in need to pre-lockdown levels. And that demand, whilst it has dropped off, remains relatively high at circa 7 times the pre-lockdown levels of food. There's been an all-of-government response to that food security and quite well funded through Ministry of Social Development, MSD. The New Zealand Food Network has been key in delivering that response. So that's food that's been recovered from supermarkets and also coordinating the distribution of that through major food hubs, local food banks, and other providers supported with CAI. Community organisations that I've said have provided the wraparound services and have been supported through MSD, Ministry of Health, and Whānau Ora. Auckland Emergency Management has also maintained contact with that food network to really ensure that those organisations have sufficient food to meet need, and where we've been required, we've been able to support that through the NEMA funding. Next slide, please. So over 2,950 grocery packs, which is equivalent to just under 15,000 standard food parcels, has been delivered to food organisations across Tamaki Makaurau. So those food or grocery packs are enough for 4 to 6 people and up to 2 weeks. So catering to larger households where you've got multiple families in those households or otherwise. That funding, as I said, has been supported through central government, both MSD and NEMA, or National Emergency Management Agency. And the council catering team in October also supported 1,450 ready-made food packs through to the Auckland City Mission, which has been really important for our rough sleeping homeless community. Next slide, please. In terms of that welfare response, we've been maintaining a really close working relationship with MSD and other agencies, including through the Auckland Regional Leadership Group, whom you've heard from in previous meetings, and participating to identify gaps in provision, including psychosocial support for communities heavily affected by the ongoing impacts of COVID in the community, and at the same time ensuring a readiness for concurrent events such as our Western floods, which were devastating in that community, but being able to respond to those events. And just the next slide, please. Just before I go to this slide, just some in terms of the council staff support, there's been a number of redeployed staff in this welfare response. So for welfare directly, those are the people making the calls into homes and households, receiving calls. Over 60 staff across the organisation have been redeployed into that area. Community food security, so those are people actually out there supporting the community deliver food. We've had 41 staff in that area. Contact tracing and vaccination, pop-up vaccination sites support 15 staff, and then some other staff, about 9 staff. So currently through this response, over 125 staff redeployed to support the response across the region and into community groups and central government agencies. So as Phil Wilson talked about, these are the rapid response landowner approvals. So these are sites that have been identified by community groups delivering welfare support for food, but also COVID testing stations, welfare parcels, vaccination centres, and in some cases blood bank drives due to the traditional ways of blood banks not being able to operate. So as you'll see in the central area, we've had over 15 of our sites, and these range from car park spaces, open spaces such as parks, facilities, halls, community centres, corporate offices, and also including some community leased buildings with the agreement of our community lessees. So across the central area, 15 sites in total, most of those of course being vaccination centres, as you see. In the southern part of the region, we've had 22 sites, most of those again being vaccination sites, but significant number of food distribution sites there as well. In the north, less demand, but 12 sites across the northern part of our region, and in the west, 7. We're currently also, staff are processing another 7 sites to support the response across a variety of activities. So that will take us to over 60, as Phil said. And the final slide, please, Sandra. Just to acknowledge Ngā Matarai and Honanga Māori response. As you've heard before, the Ngā Matarai Manaaki Fund was developed to support whānau during the lockdown. A total of over $227,000 was approved through a range of grant funds for marae, mātawaka marae, mātawaka entities and mana whenua iwi. And that connection between Te Pou Whakarai, which is the name of the Māori support response set up as part of the emergency management functions, was closely related or closely in contact with the Ministry of Social Development. And there's further work occurring to how to support Māori and iwi, including mātawaka, in the remaining part of this COVID response, and then of course the recovery. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mace, and thank you to Phil and Jim for your presentation. So we'll come now to questions. I've just got 2 on the list, so if you've got a question, can you please put it in the sidebar? I've got 3 now. First one, Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, and I acknowledge the work in a leadership sense that Jim and his team are doing to really encourage vaccination and safety. My first question is to Phil Wilson. Can you tell me the major events that we are participating in as a council this weekend? There had been some discussion of an event at Eden Park this weekend. I just wondered whether that's proceeding, or what we can do. I know there's one at the Wesley Community Centre, but are there any events that we can actively support in the city?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Fletcher. My understanding is that the Eden Park and Mount Smart Stadium events are continuing. There are a large number of varying sizes, scales around the region. So I think maybe the most efficient thing would be if I circulated a list of those that we're aware of. We are supporting quite a number again on those in some of those sites that Mace has referred to. I want to acknowledge as well that for some of those activities, what we're doing is helping secure some incentives by way of food parcels, food vouchers, and such like. Those aren't funded out of rates. To simplify, this is where we're leveraging relationships with business and so on to support them. Depending on what the needs are, the nature of our support for them is varying quite a lot. But I'll look to circulate something after this that gives people a sense of where the activity is in your areas this weekend.
Yeah, the other information I have on that, Councillor, the one at Mount Eden, Eden Park, is being run through Ngāti Whātua with Eden Park Trust Board and focusing on younger people. And the one in Mount Smart is working with the Warriors and focusing in particular, but not exclusively, on Pacifica. But it'd be good, Phil, if you can get that list around. Did you have a further question, Councillor?
Yes, I have a second question, and it's directed to Mace. And it probably comes into that area where the work is being undertaken by the Auckland Regional Leadership Group. But it's partly mental health and partly general information. Where and how can we better facilitate questions that people have, the services that they can access in non-emergency type situations? I'm detecting amongst people who contact me, there's still a lot of confusion about what they can and what they can't do in a medical sense, in a general sense, and also just from a psychological perspective, just in the queries that I'm having from constituents. I think that the length of this lockdown is beginning to take its toll on people's well-being, and I just wonder whether or not, where should we be directing people? Is there one specific information line on those types of queries?
Kia ora, Councillor Fletcher. Thank you for the questions. And just to acknowledge that, yes, this extended period of the COVID-19 response is having an impact on many parts of our community. I think Auckland Council itself, in terms of the ability to open up our open spaces in a managed way, has been a significant support in terms of what I've gleaned anecdotally and through my staff for Parks, Sport and Recreation, that role. Ministry of Health is really, and the Auckland Regional Leadership Group is setting their minds to that psychosocial support. So we will get back to you with specifics, but Healthline is the key area for people to be able to call.
Thanks, Mace. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Thanks, Phil. I've got a question for Jim and a question for you. Jim, I'm delighted to hear about the vaccination policy for staff, but I didn't quite catch your timeline on it. I know that you're going out for consultation next week. When do you hope to have it in place? And my question for Phil relates to that. Phil, we've got 170 elected members in Auckland. It's my view that they should be leading the campaign to get our population vaccinated. Are we looking at having a vaccination policy for elected members to support our staff and support the drive to have our population vaccinated? And if not, why not?
Okay, shall I answer first and then pass back to Phil? I'm pleased that all of our members of the governing body have now had at least their first injection, and most have had their second. I think there'll be a number of people, maybe half a dozen, and spread across some of our local boards that haven't. So we are encouraging people, obviously, in their role as leaders in the community, to do that. And should they choose not to, and should we adopt a policy for staff that mandates the requirement of being vaccinated, obviously that same policy would have to apply to us as elected members. Now, because people are elected members, we're not trying to block them from doing their job, but they would have to do their job in a different way, which would be, online rather than with direct contact to our staff or the public. We However, we'll be working, and won't be handled at a political level. I think we're doing it subtly through our staff members, just giving that encouragement and explaining to people why it's so important for our elected representatives to show the way and to be part of the solution. But I'll pass back to you, Phil, for the other part of the question.
Or I'm happy to take that, Mayor Phil.
Oh, Jim, sorry, it was to you, Jim.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Councillor Casey, the timeline broadly is we'll finalise our decision on the content of the consultation in the next day or two. It'll go out for consultation early next week. That process, a couple of weeks for consultation, a week or so to consider the feedback. We'll finalise our decision on the policy in early December. We expect it to take effect from January. We haven't landed on a date in January, but it could be mid-January.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Look, I'll do a mixture of questions and comments at the moment because I see at least one is a comment online. But the next question is from Councillor Pippa-Coombe.
Well, kia ora, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Morena koutou, and appreciate the update and all the work that's going into the COVID response. My partai is in the context of, I know across Auckland, different communities with different needs, and it's raised quite regularly around the city centre and apartment dwellers who do have quite unique living situations that is not really set up for pandemic hygiene, but there's a bit of a gap in information to support the people who are now isolating in the city centre. And my question is whether there's going to be some targeted information to people, I mean, it might not just be in the city centre, but across Auckland, who are living in accommodation that is not really ideal for self-isolating, but are doing that for a variety of reasons. And it just, from what I'm hearing and seeing, it looks like there's a real gap of information on whether this is something Auckland Council can pick up or whether we can ask the health providers to really look at some useful targeted information for those residents. Thank you.
Thank you. That might be to you, Mace.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Councillor Coombe. We can take that up with the Auckland Regional Leadership Group and Ministry of Health to get that messaging out, and also our own coordinate with our own communications staff. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you. That would be really appreciated.
Thanks, Mace. Comment from Councillor Fessor-Collins.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to get my camera to work, but I'm not sure that it is. But anyway, hey, Mayor,
you're there.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Hi, everybody.
Nice shirt.
Thanks. I'm trying to bring a bit of brightness into my very lonely bedroom that I'm working out of. But thanks for allowing me to make the comment, Mayor. There were two quick comments, and one is more of a plea to senior staff, and I'll come to that in a minute. But I just wanted to say and acknowledge, thank people like yourself, Mayor, and in particular Councillors Bartley and Newman, who I've seen on the ground in the events that I've been to, who are really active in the community. And I know everyone's got a different part to play. I'm not saying we should all be out there doing whatever those councillors are doing, but there's a real sense of confidence that people garner in the community when they see local leadership. So I just wanted to do a shout out. People like Councillor Dalton have been really pushing out information as well, which is really useful. And so I just wanted to do a shout out for those councillors. The comment I wanted to, and probably a plea, and I picked it up in your voice to the Chief Executive, Jim, is we acknowledge, especially for those of us who've been on the ground out south and are still dealing with a little bit of hesitancy and reluctance, and when we're often out door knocking and phone calling, so we're getting lists from different health organisations and the like, who are giving us lists to give people a phone call, and then we'll know how to target the the vans that are going out, that are door knocking and stuff. And I just wanted, I guess my plea is acknowledging that there are certain communities where there's been high levels of hesitancy and reluctance around the vaccine, that if that is reflected in perhaps some of the consultation that you'll be undertaking over the next little while, my plea is for a level of patience and generosity when we're dealing perhaps with some of those communities who are part of our workforce who might still be in that reluctancy and hesitancy mode. And that's all. I know the senior management are going to do that. I expect that of people like yourself, Jim, and others, because I've always picked up a level of patience and understanding and compassion. But I think it's just worth me saying that because we've seen so much of that out here. And I think you're right, Mayor, the patience that you're talking about is running out a little bit. I know that on the ground when we're at the vaccination centres, there's lots of patience, and especially amongst health workers who are bending over backwards to make sure our communities are vaccinated. I just think it's an important item, something that we remember, because I don't want us to fall into the trap of let's just do it and hurry up and do it. We've still got to show a level of compassion. So that's my plea to the senior management. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Councillor. And yeah, I was just watching on television the other night somebody that was being held up by the so-called hikoi and abusing the police officer that was there. And I thought, for God's sake, you know, it's time that we actually showed some support and sympathy for people that are on the front line, our health workers, you know, our police workers, and everybody that's out there working so damn hard on behalf of others. They certainly don't need abuse. They need our unqualified support for the fantastic work they're doing. And every time I go to an event where there's vaccinations, just to see the nature of the service being provided and the warmth and the welcoming, wow, you know, we owe those folk a huge debt. So thank you for your comments on that. Question, Councillor Daniel Newman.
Oh, look, thank you, Your Worship. I'm a trend of videos today. Look, at James Cook High School, they're doing a private vaccination down here for the students and staff, and it's going slowly, but it's trickling along. My question, Jim, some weeks ago I gave you some feedback in terms of my views about the approach that I felt needed to be taken. I think that the mandates that are coming through are brutal. I'm not comfortable with them, but I do support them given the extraordinary point in our history in relation to this global pandemic. But as much as possible, really wanting to fight for the retention of all staff, including those who are currently hesitant, can I just make the plea, if it hasn't been considered already, that beyond the obvious need to come to we're at a binary point really, we're either vaccinated or we're not going to be vaccinated, but if we can consider opportunities for incentives for staff where it helps them to get over the line, and also to also put the plea to staff not only for themselves, but also to really push it as hard as they can within their own bubbles to ensure that their own networks are fully vaccinated, because we will cross 90% in counties Manukau, but we will need as much headroom as possible. Everywhere will need headroom. And frankly, it's not just about getting to 90%, it's getting everyone vaccinated. So I would like us to, as an organisation, support incentives within our own organisation, if need be, to convert and to ensure that not only is that council employee safe, but their bubble is safe, because we need to try and break every opportunity for transmission of this bloody thing. That's probably more of a comment, Your Worship, but if Jim is happy to respond, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Councillor, thank you for that. I didn't make mention of the work we're doing with our leaders to encourage vaccination of our workforce and use that as a vehicle to encourage vaccination more widely. but so I agree with the point you've made, and we will. You have my assurance. We will continue to encourage through whatever mechanisms we reasonably can the proliferation of vaccination through our workforce. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Daniel, and good to see you doing the work there at James Cook. Councillor Angela Dalton. Angela.
Thank you. Just trying to get my camera going too. I had a question around the vaccination rates that you mentioned earlier, Mia, and that was the confidence of getting to 90% double vaccinated by the first week of December. I just wanted to clarify, is that just for Auckland, or is that maybe for the rest of the country? Because the anxiety that is lifting for Aucklanders is not being able to go away for Christmas to be with family. So is it, I mean, that's the next challenge, isn't it? That's where people will really start to lose the plot over the border restrictions.
Yeah, the figures I gave were for Auckland. That was the 93, 91 and 88 for first vaccinations. Across the country, it's 86.9. So the government has said that should we reach that figure first, then we'd move to the first of the traffic light stages. But that doesn't automatically mean that our borders would be down. The problem is that even if we do better than almost anybody else in getting a high rate of vaccinations, if we've still got a very large number of cases circulating in the community, which is currently running into the hundreds, then the government, I don't think, is going to feel able just to remove the border restrictions. What I'm really hoping is that, because I'm thinking of Christmas and I'm a bit of a self-interest in this one as well, with my kids and grandkids across the border. If you're double vaccinated and you've got a rapid antigen test or a test in the last couple of days, that maybe there'll be some greater flexibility shown. The huge irony for us in Auckland would be that if the borders don't come down, because the vaccination rates in our two neighbouring territories, Northland and Waikato, hadn't reached the 90%, we'll feel a bit aggrieved at that, because we'll feel the punishment for those regions not being at the level that they ought to. So my guess is, reading between the lines on the PM's language and body language, that they would really like to have some system whereby you could have some family reunifications by Christmas. And that's early December is the figure that the Northern Regional Health Coordinating Committee has given me when they anticipate we'll get to 90%. They don't have a total crystal ball, but we'd certainly like to think that there'll be relaxation within the borders and a slightly less restrictive approach across the borders, and that will also depend, of course, on COVID. We've seen it in Christchurch this morning, and we've seen it in the Waikato and in Northland. This thing doesn't respect borders, even with the restrictions in place. But because I think you're trying to work with the compliance of the voluntary compliance of the public, they'll be keen to relax it as much as they feel it's safe to do. I hope that kind of partly addresses your question.
I think that also that decision perhaps will be taken at the end of December. That is said, didn't she, that they will review the numbers because
end of November, yes.
Yeah, around the travelling within New Zealand, depending on the vaccination numbers.
Yeah, and I think she said, look, hey, if it was 88.9 and it's Christmas Eve, there'd be some flexibility. Yeah. And it's a difficult job that she and the government have at the moment, because you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But they are trying to walk that fine line. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't get it right, but they are making the effort.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to take this opportunity to say something that I've been wanting to say for a long time. When the lockdown started, when the lockdown first started, I was delivering food parcels for the Glen Innes Family Centre, and they were getting food from the marae and other places. And I I looked through the boxes and I saw that there was a lot of expired food, expired meat, expired milk, expired bread in the food boxes. And that really got me. And I started delivering it, and I started crying when I was delivering it, because I was thinking about how desperate people are, that they are so grateful for this expired food. Then I went into a meeting with council management, Councillor Filipina and Councillor Collins, because Patricia, thank you Patricia, they wanted to know how bad it was out there. So I was able to take my experience at that particular time and share it. And I want to say that I'm really grateful to council for getting involved in the food parcel space and for doing food parcels, because I was involved in the first lockdown and it wasn't this bad. So I really do appreciate what council is doing in the welfare space. I initially wrote because I couldn't see council involved in our communities, and I was just thinking, this is the worst thing to happen for Auckland as a city, and where is council? It was hitting Pacific communities the hardest. It was hitting out in South Auckland, and I really wanted to see council get in there and help us and help our communities, and we are, and I am extremely grateful. I am so proud when I see council recycling trucks delivering food parcels to our community organisations so they can get food out to people who need it. I'm so grateful to see James Parkinson and Mount Smart putting up as the venue, and Auckland Unlimited coming through with their event management teams to organise the Supervacs for Pasifika. Phil Wilson and what you're doing. I know Phil's been worried that I'm losing it, but I'm just so grateful for everything that everybody is doing at this time to help our communities get through COVID, and also to support all the community vaccination events, because it is, you know, this is where our city, this is where council should be leading. And I do acknowledge your leadership, Mayor, to make sure that council is there amongst our communities supporting. So I want to shout out to the Southside local boards, the Southside councillors, Councillor Collins, Councillor Filipina, Councillor Newman, Councillor Dalton, Mangere o Tahu local board, Le Maunga, Lotu and Reese, Otara Papatori local board, my own local board, Maungakiki Tamaki, Nick, Harry, all of us that are out there on the ground supporting our communities and putting ourselves at risk as well, but going hard to make sure our communities get vaccinated, because it's the only way it's going to save their lives. So I am extremely thankful to council staff, Phil, Greg, Tamsin, Mace, Claudia, Patricia, Laurie, all of you, and everything that our council people are doing to help support our community vaccinations, because that is the only thing that is important, is getting the vaccinations up so we can try and get ourselves back to some kind of normalcy. So acknowledge you, Mayor, and your leadership in helping get our city through this. Apologies for crying, but it's pretty hard out trying to look after our own wards, our own areas, and then also the city. So yeah, thank you everybody. I'm going to shut up now.
Thanks so much, Josephine, and for putting your heart and your soul into it. We all recognise how much it means to you to be out there as part of your community and giving the help and the support that your community needs. Just before I take the last question, which is Councillor John Watson, maybe Councillor Bartley, if I can ask you to move, and Councillor Newman to second that we receive this report. I'll take it that you're both happy to do that, and we'll finally come to Councillor John Watson. Yours is the last question comment.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a question following up on your introductory remarks in terms of the increasing impact on people's jobs, on their ability to earn an income, or and all the related things that go with that. We have had the an analysis of job seeker additional people going on to job seekers support. In terms of that wider impact that probably most of us are hearing anecdotal stories about, do we have any access to information, perhaps a little more refined area, even by ward or by local board, of the effects in terms of what I've just stated, people losing their jobs, businesses closing down, or businesses seeking, urgent support, and thereby perhaps signalling that, they're not that far away from going under as well. Certainly Councillor Walker and I have detected in the last little while, in our area, a lot more people under a lot more visible strain than was the case, over a year ago in the first major lockdown. So I'm just curious to know, in amongst all the information analyses that come through, do we have the ability to get a more precise understanding of what the impact is at this stage in terms of, A, people who are losing their jobs within certain parts of Auckland, and B, which hasn't been quite so clear but relates to the first one, the number of businesses that are being directly impacted in terms of, possible or imminent closure?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think those are good questions, and I don't think that we have clarity of information around it that we'd want. Auckland Unlimited in its newsletter usually puts out what the number of people that are job seekers are, and it's indicated a rise in that field. It's harder to get figures on businesses. You've got liquidation figures, but there's a time lag there. And so therefore a lot of what we're doing is only anecdotal, and some of the businesses will not so much formally close down, it's just they won't come back into operation when we go to a better level. But I'll just ask Mace or Phil if they have anything more specific. I doubt that we've got it by ward, but Mace or Phil, are you aware of what sort of statistical information we've got there?
Your Worship, I'll take that one. You're exactly right. The information's a bit fragmented across different agencies and sources. I think we can do some work to try and pull a coherent package together. Some parts of it, such as job seeker information, are readily available, and there's some other work to quantify opinions, views, levels of optimism, psychological impacts and such like in the business community, so that can be sourced. But we'll take that offline and see if we can pull together something coherent and useful to members.
Thanks.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if I may. Thank you. In part, the reason I mentioned it is that certainly within some of the communities that we represent, no doubt across Auckland as a whole, there's a real desire of people to support local businesses, and the obvious targets for that are the hospitality of the cafes, where that's evident. But beyond them, there are numbers of other businesses that clearly, obviously, require more support too. And what I'm certainly detecting is, there's a willingness of people to do that, to pull together as a community, and to, perhaps even refocus that energy of kind of negativity that understandably has come about as a consequence of one thing or another, but to refocus that into supporting each other. And I guess without that sort of clarity, it can be a little difficult to direct that sort of potential, mobilisation of the community. We hear of businesses that, ironically enough, are doing better at this time, and almost thriving in these circumstances. But I guess that sense of what's really happening on the ground would be very useful to be communicating to people out there too, because what I certainly sense is a desire amongst significant numbers of people is to band together and to support those who need it, and particularly as it goes to maintaining employment levels and businesses sort of lasting this out. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor. I mean, the feedback I do get from businesses is that without the wage subsidy and without, particularly with the doubling of the resurgence support payment, there'd be a whole lot of businesses that would be in desperate trouble, and a whole lot of people that would find that they no longer had employment. So, you know, that figure is, I think, about $940 million a fortnight that's going out, and about probably these days about 3/4 of it's coming to Auckland. Look, with that, I want to thank all of our staff for the work that they're putting into it. To thank all of you that have been out there doing the work on the ground as well. You know, it does make a difference, and want to show my appreciation to you for your work and for your leadership. So this item's been moved by Councillor Bartley, seconded by Councillor Newman. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried.